Could we have everyone take their seats, please? Good schooled children you are. So tomorrow is my sister Debbie's birthday, and I said, what could I get you for your birthday? And she said, well, could you get David Baldacci to come to Kennebunkport and do... So, happy birthday. So it is so exciting to be among such an amazing group of people here tonight. If you have not done so already, if you could please silence your cell phones, we would really appreciate it. After the program, Mr. Baldacci will be over at this table, and he is going to personalize your little yellow note that you wrote inside, if you wrote one. So hopefully you've had a chance to fill out your sticky note, and we are going to form a line here, and we will take it from there. So you did see inside that your book has already been signed, but if you wanted it personalized, he's happy to do that. So before we get started, we have an award to present and a few people to thank tonight. Given the importance of libraries and research in all scholarly pursuits, the Library Board has been honoring Joyce Butler, local historian and the author of our history book set, by asking fourth graders at Kennebunkport Consolidated School to write an essay each year, do a little research, and write this essay, 500 words, on a notable figure, a historic building, or an important event that occurred in town in the last 400 years. So after careful consideration, the Joyce Butler Student Historian Award is going to Eric Freed. So, Eric, if you could go right here. This Terry's right there. So Eric wrote an essay on the fire of 47. So this is our children's librarian extraordinaire, Terry Bald. She's going to present him with the award today. Yeah. Congratulations, Eric. Thank you. So, some people to thank. Our esteemed guests, David and Michelle Baldacci. We appreciate your time, your commitment to so many nonprofits, and your body of work that makes so many readers wanting more. Our sponsors tonight, Spinnaker Trust, Fine Print Booksellers, Kennebunk Beach Realty, Mary and John Mills, Margie and Robert Dennis, Denise and Mike Iafola, Paul Mahoney, Vicki and Mark Lamar, Rosemary and Billy Shore, Mutasia, Kitchen Chicks Catering, Hurlbut Designs, The Colony Hotel, Amy and Craig Hazeltine, Rich and Kristen Woodman, Edison Press, Mike Kelly, Sopo Wine Company, the Winehouse on Main, and of course, the Kennebunk River Club, and staff. So, and Denise and Mike Iafola for being great neighbors, moving to Maine, and joining our board, and introducing us to your lovely friends. So thank you. And thanks to all of you for purchasing tickets and supporting Graves Library. Without you attending events like this one, we could not continue to offer the essential services to our community that we do. And because of your interest and your donation, 100% of the proceeds tonight benefit the Graves Library. So we truly, truly thank you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Amy and Craig Hazeltine, who will say a few words about their friend, David Baldacci.
David should be worried about now, but. So good evening. Amy and I are just delighted to introduce our very good friends of over 30 years, Michelle and David Baldacci. By sheer luck, we all got married in 1990 and moved into a townhouse community in Alexandria and moved across the street. And we've been fast friends ever since. So way back when we were together in Alexandria, it was clear to us that we were going to be fast friends for life. Dave and I got married, and we started, and we looked at each other, and we said, this is an adventure. We can do this. We can do this newlywed thing. We had no kids. We had no responsibilities. We had a couple jobs. And we said, look, the only thing that we really have to learn to do is compromise. And I said, I think we can do it. And so we had a great time. And, 6 months turned into a year, turned into 30 years. And then we learned that compromise was really not what they wanted. What they wanted was absolute power. And total control. So Michelle and Amy would say that Dave and I have a lot more to learn if they gave you the whole truth about our experience. So Dave actually reminds me all the time that for every one story about David Baldacci, he has two about Craig. And he has over 100 million followers. So I'm not telling you too many David stories, but the good news is Amy does not have this constraint.
Well, I could not have asked for a better setup. Can we just say that? 34 years plus. So thank you for everybody for letting us be here with you tonight, and certainly thank you to all of the folks who pulled this event together. I know it took a lot of hands and a big village to make it happen, so thank you for that. I do have a few stories to tell, but I did want to take a brief moment just to give a shout out and raise a glass if you happen to have one, or just put your hands together for Mary Lou. So Mary Lou, whoop, whoop! Mary Lou was designated as Maine's Librarian of the Year. Like, holy cow. And as Craig said, the whole truth is to make sure that as we're gathering tonight, and we are here to celebrate the importance and the criticality of libraries in a community and how that delivers literacy, I wanted to say thank you to Mary Lou for keeping literally the doors open to the world of knowledge for all of your patrons. So thank you for that. So as Craig said, we are truly blessed to have had an extremely long and wonderful friendship with David and Michelle. The reality is we grew up together. We did our early adulting together. We raised our kids together. And I might say, we did a little bit of goofing off. And whether it was daylight or perhaps 1 minute to midnight, I can darn well guarantee you we did some raising of a little bit of hell. No, but quite seriously, before, David became as famous as he is, before he became that People magazine most beautiful person, before he became an incredibly prolific and successful author, and before he became a man who not only lives his values, but truly speaks those in many ways across the globe, a philanthropist, he was our friend. He was our neighbor. And so I have been thinking, and we've been thinking a little bit about what this equates to and how we would convey to you the importance and the value of that friendship. So, on the first day that we met David and Michelle, we actually just met Michelle. Now, let me just set the context here. I think a few of you might be from New England and the great state of Maine, just a few hand raises there. So I'm from Virginia, and I'm married into an England family. My mother-in-law is from the great state Commonwealth of Massachusetts. My father-in-law, God bless him, was from New Hampshire, and they both met summering in Maine. So when I married into this New England family, I learned there were 6 key things to every New England family's existence. You don't have to raise your hands and count with me, but I will just share them with you. The first thing was toilet paper. Super important. The second thing, paper towels. The third thing, water. The fourth thing, not sure if you'll guess this one, good wine. Totally real. The fifth thing was scotch. And the last thing that was important to every New England family's existence, as I was born and raised into as a new wife, was a hammer. Now, why is this story so important to the telling of the tale and narrative of David and Michelle? Well, because within, 24 hours of us living in our new townhouses, we get a beautiful knock at the door. And who do we see? Do we see David? Nope. We see Michelle. And why is she there? To ask to borrow a hammer. And imagine our shock, awe, and amazement. We went, oh man, because I'm sure she had the wine, and I'm pretty darn sure she had the scotch, but the hammer. So we have been giving David a bit of a challenge and a hard time about this for many, 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 many decades. And unfortunately, it has cast, you ready, a long shadow over David's long-standing desire and commitment to be known as a super-duper fancy and handy homeowner. But that's okay, because we recognize, and probably all of you who have read his novels know, that said hammer is in that undisclosed location and probably will be forever and ever and ever. But either way, it's been a wonderful opportunity to get to know them and to be with them. And so as we progress through our life and we're adulting and raising kids, I will say this. David, he is not a gambling man, but we did convince David and Michelle one summer to come up to the balmy waters of Maine and Moody Beach. And they came with their beautiful children, a daughter and a son, and we enjoyed every minute of it, rain or shine, and I can guarantee you there was definitely 1 or 2 weeks where it was pretty much all rain, and then a few weeks where it was all shine, but it doesn't matter. We had a wonderful time. So in part of inviting them up there, we were having a blast, and one particular summer, Michelle and David received an invitation from another extremely important and, in fact, tremendously impactful, super-duper famous family that happens to live in Kennebunkport, toward the other side, perhaps known as Walker's Point. And there this invitation came, and Michelle and David and Craig and Amy were sitting here, we're talking, we're like, what do we wear, what do we do? And the key piece of the invitation wasn't just about David and Michelle. No. These extraordinary guests, they asked them to bring their 2 children, their daughter and their most extraordinary, rambunctious, and creatively and clever godson, our godson, and he was invited too, 3.5 years old. So David and Michelle were hemming and hawing, and they're like, well, this honor is too great to pass up. And truly it is and was. And we recognize and appreciate the public service that this particular set of neighbors that I know you know well have done for our country and for our world. But that being said, they were still debating, what do we do? How do we do this? We have this wonderful daughter. She's easygoing. She's carefree. She's relaxed. And we have this 3.5-year-old son who is creative, clever, rambunctious, and very keen and curious. So in that moment, they were literally and figuratively walking the wire as it related to be, can I be the gracious guest or am I a parental home monitor? Unclear. Well, the good news is that the, of course, hosts were exceptionally gracious, and as you may know, they've raised a few boys on their own, so they made everybody feel deeply, deeply welcome. And it began a very lifelong and beautiful relationship. So I've done my part. I'm going to turn the mic back over to my best friend and my co-partner here, and I will let him wrap us up.
So David and Michelle, much like Barbara Bush, have been committed to literacy and the importance of libraries. And I will tell you that the Baldaccis have established a foundation called the Wish You Well Foundation, who has brought the written word all over the United States. And so with that, I get to introduce my very dear friend, David Baldacci.
I have to sit in this chair. Just pardon me. This is an amazing chair. Thank you so much. It's lovely. I was in Charlotte for the Charlotte Mecklenburg County Public Library fundraiser, And they had done these little vignettes of the different authors who came. There's 5 authors. They did sort of 5 dioramas from scenes from the people's books, right? So they had a beautiful beach scene and sort of a very romantic scene, and my scene had a corpse. A real live corpse. It was a guy they had paid, and he had blood all over him, and he was laying there. And they must have taken 1,000 pictures with him. Everybody just loved the corpse. So, but I'm glad you didn't have the dead body today. Thank you very much for that. Amy and Craig, we raised our kids together. We're godparents back and forth. They mean so much to us. And their kids are our kids are their kids. And the friends you make early on in very important moments in your life, like just getting married, starting your lives together, then having kids, those are critical. And sometimes they're lifelong friends. Sometimes you move away and you do other things, but staying in touch with them and being in part of their lives has been really significant and meaningful, I know, for Michelle and I and our family. So it's wonderful. Mike and Denise, you were so instrumental in getting us to come up here. Thank you so much for that. You guys are just amazing. Mary Lou, congratulations, librarian. Librarians in my world are rock stars. Rock stars. Thank you for coming out tonight. I'm not sure I'd come to see me, so that's very nice of you. I don't know. I never take anything for granted. My wife and I went to the library today and to tour it and see what it was all about, and it is absolutely extraordinary. I've been in lots of libraries in my life, in this country and lots of other countries, and you have a jewel, you have a gem here. There is a room for everything. I think my wife called it, it's a library that's really the room of requirements, like in Harry Potter. Whenever you need a room, it just happens to be there when you go in and you get stuff done. So it's quite amazing. I did a book tour starting in New Orleans in May. I flew down to New Orleans. One of our other godsons was graduating Tulane Medical School. My wife and I flew down and attended that joyous occasion. And then I did a book tour on the way back up. So I went through New Orleans and the Deep South all the way back up to Virginia. And I don't really have to do that. I mean, I've written over 50 novels. I've been doing this a long time. People ask, why do I still tour? And my answer is very simple. I'm part of an ecosystem, a very special ecosystem. It comprises readers and writers and publishers and booksellers. And like any ecosystem, if one of us doesn't shoulder our responsibilities to that ecosystem, what happens to it? It dies. And that's such a special ecosystem because for me, reading and books and writing and just learning together is really the full faith and credit of the United States of America. It has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with us and what we put inside of our heads. But when I go on book tour, I get lots of questions from people. And one I get more than any other is, so what is it like to be a #1 best-selling novelist? And I know they want a really Hollywood glitzy answer, like I get up at noon every day, And I have a favorite sweater I put on, and I have a little dog I carry under my arm, and I go down to my study where I have a bevy of people waiting to write down everything I might say. My life is not like that at all. I go to a cool event, I come home, I'm telling my wife, Michelle, about it. She's like, stops me halfway through. Yeah. It's trash night. Get on it. If you want to know why I only write about strong, independent women in all of my novels, 1, I have never met a damsel in distress in my life. And 2, I sleep with a very strong, independent woman. All I know. It's all I know. So in answer to that question, what is it like to be a #1 best-selling novelist, I tell people a true story about my kids. Now, when my daughter was around 5, she had no idea what her dad did for a living. Just didn't, matriculate into a 5-year-old's mind. She thought I wrote in books. I would write my name in books. So she never wanted me to come to her school. Ever. For Parents' Career Day, no, Dad. They don't like you to write in the books. Just stay away. But I wanted her to sort of know what I did, so I took her to a book signing of mine when she was little. We went into the bookstore, and the lady who owned the store came over and greeted us and asked my daughter, do you know why all these people are here? And my daughter said, yes, I know. Why are they here? They want my dad to sign their book. And why is that? She goes, it's obvious. My dad has the nicest handwriting. Like my whole success is based on calligraphy. Now, my son was around 2 or 3 when I took him to a bookstore just to buy books. I didn't have an event, and we were just customers. And my son has always been like, how can I make a lot of money really fast kind of a kid. So we walked into the bookstore, and he saw the books and all the people and all the cash going through the cash register, and it's like this light bulb went off in his head. And my son started running across the bookstore at the top of his speed, screaming at the top of his lungs, "My daddy will sign any book you've got for $2. Doesn't matter who wrote it. Bring me your Faulkners or Hemingways. It doesn't really matter. We'll take care of you here. Now, obviously, in my career, I've had to fly lots of places, and planes, trains, and automobiles, right, all over the world. And crazy things happen to you sometimes when you don't expect them to. I was on a flight one time at 35,000 feet, minding my own business. And this is before 9/11, to give you some context. And I was sitting there, and the pilot came out of the cockpit. I just assumed he came out to either get something to eat or to relieve himself. And he was having this conversation with one of the flight attendants, and which wasn't curious, except for they kept looking over at me. And then the flight attendant went and got some paper, and it was like they were looking through maybe a manifest, I don't know, and they were like talking, whispering back and forth. And then the flight attendant walked away and kind of glanced at me, and I'm thinking to myself, well, are we going down? And then the pilot comes over and sits down next to me, and I was like, yep, we're going down. And for some reason, he feels the need to share it with me. So he's sort of like very nervous, very uncomfortable, which you don't want a pilot to be at all. And he looked at me and he said, can I ask you something? I said, yes, but should I text my wife first and say goodbye? He goes, no, we're fine. The plane's fine. I said, thank you. He said, okay. He said, well, ask me. What do you want to ask me? He said, I got a great idea for a thriller. Do you want to hear it? I got to say, I never saw that one coming. I never saw that one coming. Now, I don't know about all of you, but I really, generally, as a rule for me, I like 2 pilots flying every plane that I'm on. You never know what might happen up there, right? So I made a deal with him. I said, hey, if you get back up in the cockpit with your friend and you land safely, I will stay behind and you can tell me your story. He said, awesome. He ran back up in the cockpit. We landed. And everybody deplaned except me. I stayed behind. He came over, and he was so excited. He sat down and very enthusiastically told me his idea for a thriller. And God, it sucked. I mean, it's like, I don't know what else to say about it. But I wasn't going to tell him that. I am a nice guy. It's not, I never want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. I can't do that. I cringe at even the thought of making someone feel bad. So I'm thinking to myself, how do I say this diplomatically? And finally, I thought, not everybody is cut out to be a pilot. And I said, you are. And I said, I think you're doing with your life exactly what you should be doing. I said, that landing, magnificent. I never felt a thing. I thought we were still in the air. Not many people can do that, okay? Now, on the flip side of that argument, not everybody can write a book. I mean, they just can't. I mean, if you look at the odds, it's pretty long odds. I can't be a pilot, and, just to speak frankly, I'm not really sure you can be a writer. And then I just grabbed my bag and I ran the hell out of the plane. Because I could tell by his expression that my argument was not winning him over. And that's been over 20 years ago, and I have to say that every flight that I've gone on since, I'm looking for this guy. Because I don't think I want him flying the plane that I'm on, It's like unfulfilled dreams turn people bitter and bad, and I don't know. Now, over the years, I've gotten lots of fan mail, and when I first started out, it was real mail. This is before internet and emails, and so my publisher would collect big bags of fan mail and then periodically send them down to me in Virginia. And back then, I read them all because I was like, I can't believe people are taking the time to write to me. This is amazing stuff. And most of the letters were terrific. Love your books. Can't wait for the next one. Very complimentary. And then I got one that was none of those things. And I knew that I was in trouble because of the way the book was, or the letter was addressed. And it was addressed to Dear Mr. Disgusting. So in the body of the letter, she said, I can't believe that you took a national political scandal and wrote a book about it for money. You repulse me. And then she went on to explain that your book, Absolute Power, which deals with the President of the United States, is not a really nice person. He commits a crime, he's indicted, and then tried. Yeah, that's... I see where you might be going with that one. In addition to signing books, I'm also reading palms, and for another $2, and I will read your palm. And so she thought that I had based Absolute Power on the Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky scandal. So I thought, well, I can fix that. So I actually wrote her back and I said, if you look at the copyright page of Absolute Power, it was published in January of 1996. I sold the book in 1994. I wrote it between 1991 and 1994, years before anyone had even heard of Monica Lewinsky. Therefore, I could not have based my book on a political scandal that happened after my book was published. Sincerely, not Mr. Disgusting. And I thought they would have carried the day. So a week went by, and here comes another letter from her. And it was very brief, and I could tell from, again, who it was addressed to that my argument had not carried the day because it was addressed to, Dear, still, Mr. Disgusting. And it was only one sentence long, and all it said was, that proves nothing. So if you think that we've only recently been living in alternative universes, it's actually been here for a while. Now, my next book comes out in November. It's called The Edge. It brings back the character from The 620 Man, which is a book that it came out last summer. And I was up here with my wife last fall, visiting Craig and Amy, and having a wonderful time after having not been to Maine for quite a few years. And we had such a terrific time, and I was really inspired again. So The Edge is almost entirely set in coastal Maine. And you will recognize some of the places. It's a little farther north, and let me just tell you up front, it's a made-up town. I made it up because I don't want you to write and say, that mailbox is not on that corner. And that coffee shop closed a long time ago, you moron. Don't want to hear that. So, but it goes to show that when you travel to places, you can be inspired by stuff. And this is a state that definitely inspires. This is the area here that definitely inspires. People ask me, where do you get your ideas from? And I say, it's simple. I wake up every day and I walk out the door. I just see stuff. I seize opportunities out there that might end up in a book or a story one day. I see two people talking and it inspires me to wonder what they're talking about. Or they exchange a package and somebody walks off with a package. I wonder what's in the package and what are they going to do with it and why was it given to that person. So when you start asking questions, then you feel a need to start answering those questions, and that's where books come from, at least for me. Next spring, I have my first real courtroom drama that I spent 14 years of my life writing this novel. It's set in 1968. For those of us of a certain age, 1968 was one of the most calamitous years in the history of this country. Lots of terrible things happened during that time period, but I sort of poured my whole heart and soul into this novel. Part of it is very autobiographical. I grew up in the South in the 60s and 70s, a very different place. But it's a story that I wasn't sure I was ever going to finish. I kept putting it away and not picking it back up, but over the last 5 or 6 years, I decided that the story was still relevant and still needed to be told, so I'm looking forward to that one coming out. I've sold the Atlee Pine series to Amazon Prime for a television series, so they're working on that for television series, and yeah, that's nice. And then they had a writer's strike. They're still working on it, so we're good. And I sold the 620 Man series to Netflix, so they're working on that as well. Yeah. And about 5 years ago, I had people out in LA, they said, we'd love you to just write anything you'd like to write, not based on a book, write something that interests you. So I wrote this sort of spy thriller that they filmed last year called Gray. I'm not sure what platform it's going to be out on when we're told. We'll put it on the website, but it stars Patricia Clarkson, who is a marvelous Oscar-nominated actress, and Rupert Everett, who's a very talented British actor. So that's different for me because it's just something I just wrote apart from any book. I just had an idea and I wrote it, and they obviously liked it. So now I'm here as the guest of the library, and again, I grew up in Richmond in the 60s and 70s in a very heavily segregated society. and I didn't really have a chance to travel anywhere. My family didn't have the financial bandwidth to do that. The only time we would leave Richmond, we would go to Virginia Beach for a day to get our annual sunburn. And we would always stay at the Earth Motel. It's actually the Surf Motel, but the S burned out. So I've always remembered it as the Earth Motel. It was not a really high-class place. They didn't have enough money to replace the neon in the S, obviously, but I still remember the Earth Motel. And I grew up with people who looked at the world a certain way and thought that that time period was perfectly fine and should always remain so. And that's how the world should be put together or kept separate, as the case may be. I could have grown up like that too, with that same outlook and that same perspective. And what saved me was the library and books. That's what saved me. Mark Twain, I'm on the board of the Mark Twain House, and my wife and I have sponsored the last 6 years the Mark Twain Literary Prize. He's probably the most iconic American writer of all time, the most famous person of his generation. He had this very wonderful quote, and he was also the most traveled man of his generation. He traveled the world like 5 times. This is back when you only had trains and boats. There were no United Airlines back then. But his quote was that travel is fatal to prejudice. But if you don't have a chance to travel, you can still travel the world through books. You can go to the library and check out any book you want. So I went there as a little boy every Saturday with my brother and sister, and I would check out more than I was supposed to because the librarians knew that I was going to read all of those books and come back the next week for more. So I got to read about people that didn't look like me, dress like me, speak like me, learn like me, pray like me, but we all shared that common core of humanity. So what books did for me, it taught me probably the greatest attribute any of us can have, because it leads to all the other positive qualities of humanity, and that is empathy. If you have empathy in your soul and in your outlook on life, all good things follow from that. An absence of empathy, all bad things follow from that, unfortunately, because empathy is the key component we need to be able to relate and understand and want to include everyone in our lives and in our world. And books in the library did that for me in Richmond, Virginia, because I passed those monuments on Monument Avenue every day of my life and stared up at 60-foot tall bronze statues of men who were put up there not right after the Civil War, but in 1910 when Jim Crow was alive and well, as a beacon of we will rise again, and you will not be a citizen of the United States much longer. So that was sort of the world that I lived in. But books changed everything for me. So thank you to all libraries and librarians out there. Now back to the funny stories, okay? Now I'm published in 51 foreign languages around the world. And I am David Baldacci on every one of those books in every one of those foreign languages except for one. One language in one country I was forced to adopt a pseudonym. And this is how that happened. I was at home back in 1995 before the book had been published anywhere, Absolute Power, and I got a call from my agent in New York, and he said, I have the chairman of Mondadori, the largest publisher in Italy, in my office right now. They love Absolute Power. They think it's going to be a huge success in Italy, but they have a problem with the name. Now, I thought he was talking about the title of the book. And so I thought, well, if they have a problem with the title, they could change it. In Germany, if you go to try to find Absolute Power by me, you won't be able to find it, because in German, it was translated and published as the President, because it was about the President, because Absolute Power didn't really translate well into German. But I thought in Italian, it should translate pretty well. So I said, well, they can change the title. He goes, no, they love the title. The title is going to be at Absolute Power. They have a problem with your name. So for those of you who thought that Baldacci was maybe, I don't know, Irish, I'm not, I'm Italian-American. So I was befuddled by the fact that my Italian publisher, of all the foreign languages, would have a problem with my Italian last name. And I voiced that to my agent. I said, what is the problem? He said, well, apparently Italians won't read books written by other Italians. And I was like, well, that's funny, because Dante, Puzo, and Machiavelli had pretty good careers, He said, well, I guess it's much like American films, action films. They think American thrillers and all that are the best, they're the cream of the crop, and that's what they want. So they see Baldacci, they're going to think you're an Italian, and not an Italian-American, and they won't buy your book. And other authors of Italian heritage, Lisa Scottolini, she was Lisa Scott. Steve Martini was, you guessed it, Steve Martin. And I was crushed. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this. I said, well, what sort of a name do they want? He said, well, they want an American name. And I said, we're a country of immigrants. I mean, except for Native Americans, we all got here by a boat somehow, way back when. And he said, well, I can tell you're upset. Why don't you just think about it over the weekend, and we'll talk about it next week. And I said, no. They want an American name. You give me 5 seconds. I'll come up with the greatest American name you've ever heard. He said, okay. So I remember I put the phone down. I was like, oh my God, what do I do now? Well, luckily I looked out the window and I saw the vehicle that we had just recently purchased, and I picked the phone up, I said, they can call me David Ford. So right away my agent said, that sounds American. It does. He said, let me try it out in the Italian. So I hear him telling the Italians he wants to be called David Ford. Now the next word I hear is screamed out by the chairman of Mondadori so loudly I can hear him even though he's not holding the phone. And the word he screams out is, genius! We Italians are very demonstrative, emotional people, you know. So my agent got back on the phone and they said, oh my God, David, they love it. How in the hell did you come up with that so fast? And I said, hey, if you remember nothing else about me, remember this. I'm a writer. This stuff oozes off me 24/7, you know. So David Ford, #1 best-selling writer in Italy, and a wonderful man, just a wonderful man. I love him like a brother, sort of. Now, I went and traveled and toured over in Italy for Absolute Power, and the way they do it in Italy was a little bit different. So I toured with the chairman of Mondadori. So we would go to these big venues and come up on stage together, and we do like a sort of like dog and pony show. I'd read and take questions, and he would do the same, and it was all that. So guess what his name was? His name was Gianni Ferrari. So every night we were introduced as Ford and Ferrari. I mean, seriously, when that movie came out, I was like, I lived that, okay? But every time I tell that story, even think about that time in my life, I say one sort of like, thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God, that we sold the Subaru. Because that was my bachelor car, and then we got kids and we bought the Ford. And because, you know, the David Subaru thing, that would not have been genius. I just don't think that would have been genius. Because I'm in Maine, I'm going to tell this story. I don't tell it that often, but I think it's important. So Amy mentioned the fact that we were friends with the Bushes for a long, long time. And she really helped us when we started our literacy foundation. And the way we met, I got a fan letter from Barbara Bush, 25 years ago, and she asked me to come to speak at one of their Barbara Bush Literacy Foundation galas. And so obviously I went down, and it was wonderful, and that's where the friendship started. But before all of that, they invited us to come to Walker's Point and spend time with them. So we went up there, and it was both kids and my in-laws as well. And it was kind of like the Beverly Hillbillies goes to meet the Bushes, you know, because this is way back. I was just started out my writing career. We had loaded up the truck, and we went to Beverly, basically, you know. It was like stuffed with stuff. And so you pull up to the guard gate. There's a big gate, and, you know, you have a voice box. And so I pushed the button, and I told him who I was, and the gate slowly opened. The guy said something, but I couldn't hear what he said. So the gate opened, and I'm just sitting there. And Michelle said, what are you doing? And I said, I don't know if he said, come on up or stay right there. So we're staying right here, you know. And like 3 minutes went by, and finally the guard on the voice box, I hear him say, sir, are you having car trouble? I said, oh, no, we're just changing the diaper on the baby, and we'll be right up. So we had a wonderful time, and I'm sure all of you know that George Sr., Bush Sr. was a big boating enthusiast. And I love boats too. I pilot boats and I love being on the water. So when we were up there, he had his 32-foot fountain center console boat with the triple Yamaha engines, I think. I mean, this boat was like packing heat, like you wouldn't believe. And in the little cove at Walker's Point, and we went down there, and he was in the boat, and he said, "Hey, would you guys like to go for a boat ride?" And I was like, "Absolutely, I'd love to go for a boat ride." So we got on the boat. It was in the bow. It was me, my son, who was 3, 4 at the time, my father, who had spent time in the Navy, just foreshadow that. The payoff will come later. In the cockpit was President Bush, and my wife was sitting next to him. Standing behind them, the Secret Service agent who travels on the boat. In the stern seats were my daughter, who was about 6 or 7, and one of the Bush granddaughters. So Bush says, "Okay, there's only one rule on this boat, which is an important rule, so listen up. If at any time the speed of this vessel causes anyone any type of concern, all you have to do is raise your hand. Everybody understand that rule? Okay, here we go." So he slams the throttle down, we spin out, we blow out into the Atlantic Ocean, 3-foot seas, we're doing about 35 knots, such that the entire 32-foot boat is coming out of the water with every pass. And I can hear those triple Yamahas go, "Wing!" right? And because I'm in the bow, I am being levitated out of my seat, every time we come back down. I've got my son crushed under my arm. My Navy father-in-law was like, "We're going to die." And there was supposed to be this Secret Service chase boat behind us. I couldn't even see them. They were, and I found out that they had trouble with him before, so they confiscated a boat from the DEA who had confiscated it from South American drug runners. It was painted black, it was a beautiful boat. This boat had some engine power. Couldn't even see them. They were totally out of sight. So after like the 4th time of my butt going up in the air and coming back down, I raised my hand. And I remember Bush looks over the cockpit. "Oh, faster?" Boom. Now we're doing 45 knots, right? And the only reason we stopped was because there's a rocky shoal out there, and there were some seals sliding all over the rock down there. So we stopped the boat. He stopped the boat so the kids could watch the seals play. And it's the only reason we stopped. And I have to tell you, ever since then, I have had a spot in my heart for seals that you would not believe. My favorite animal of all time now. So then Bush said, "Okay, we're going to go, I'll show you my sister's house. She lives down the coast a little bit from us." And the Secret Service agent, he's wired back to HQ at Walker's Point. So he's listening, talking. And he said, President Bush, it's not high tide yet, sir. Remember what happened last time." So I bucked up my courage and I said, "What happened last time?" He said, "Well, yeah, it was low tide. The boat hit a rock and caught on fire. Had the Canadian Prime Minister Mulroney with me. It was bad, very bad." So here's how we solved that. So we go into this cove, and I'm hanging off the starboard side, and my father-in-law is hanging off the port side of this boat. We're calling out rocks to him. "Got a big one over here, sir." "Okay." "Got a very big death one over here." "Okay." So we made it through the cove without blowing up, which is awesome. And then Bush said, "Okay, we're going to head on back to Walker's Point now." Secret Service agent, listening, talking. "Sir, there are swimmers in the cove at Walker's Point. Swimmers in the cove, sir. Remember what happened last time." I no longer had it in me to ask him. I was like, what the hell? Doesn't matter. So we fly back and we make the turn into the cove. And the cove is not huge. It's not much bigger than this room. And at the back of the cove is like jagged rock sticking up. That is the point of no return for any marine vessel. We are heading towards that spot at speed, and we're not slowing down. And I'm in the bow, and I'm going to see it first. So I got my son again, crushed under my arm. My father-in-law, Navy guy, was like, "We're really going to die this time. I know you know that." And here comes the rock, and we're not slowing down, and this is getting a little dicey. And then I hear somebody scream out, it was a Secret Service agent, "Everybody on this boat, hold the hell on right now." So I turned around and I looked at the guy. He has braced himself. He's got one hand on my daughter, one hand on the Bush granddaughter. He's locked his knees, and I think he's praying. I mean, I really do. His eyes were closed, and I got to tell you, much like two pilots in the cockpit, you never want to see a Secret Service agent praying. I mean, you just don't. It's not anything that inspires confidence to anyone. It inspires panic. And I turn back around, and here comes the bow. The rocks are coming at it, and I was like, I remember the only thing I thought was, well, this is going to be one hell of an obituary. And then at the last moment, I mean, Bush rips the wheel, and the boat does one of these, and I could have scooped the Atlantic up, in my hand, and we do a 180, and the stern's pointing towards the rocks, the bow's pointing out, and we just stop, and we're all like this, And then Bush gets up, and he's like, I hope you had fun. You were never in any real danger. And, we sure hope you come back. So we went over to the dock, and they're tying up the boat, and the Secret Service agent gets out. I had signed like 5 books with this guy before we got on the boat, So I thought he owed me, right? So I was like, "Hey, Jack, you got a minute?" He goes, "Oh, sure, yeah." We walked over, and he said, "Yeah, what's up?" I said, "What's up?" "What was that, Jack?" He said, "Oh, you mean the boat ride?" I said, "Yes, the boat ride." He goes, "What do you want me to do about it?" I was like, "Okay, I get that." All right. So I walk up the little knoll. I had all my land legs back. I'm kind of like wobbling. And I get up there, and Mrs. Bush is there with my in-law, my mother-in-law, who was a genius because she didn't go. Because she thought it might have been too rough. Yes, it was. So as I'm walking by Mrs. Bush, she turns and says, "You're never going to go out with him again, are you?" I said, "Mrs. Bush, with all due respect, it's not a chance in hell I'm ever going to get on a boat with that man again." She said, "Yeah, I stopped going years ago." She goes, I know how you feel, but if you hang around for a few more minutes, what you might see next, I think will make you feel a lot better." So that was intriguing enough for me. It's like, okay, so I walked over and stood next to her. And ESPN was up there filming Bush as part of this baseball documentary. He played at Yale. He met Babe Ruth. His son was a part owner, I think, of the Texas Rangers. So baseball was a big part of his life. And there were 2 anchors up there, male and female, who back then were very famous. You would all know who they were. They were beautiful people, hair perfectly coiffed. They just scintillating, people. Very nice to look at. So I'm up there, and they run down to the dock where Bush is still in the boat. And because words carry over water pretty easily, I could hear what he said. And he says to them, "Hey, you want me to pull you on a tube?" And the one guy, the male anchor, he said, "I don't know, President Bush, is it fun?" And Bush said, "It's a lot of fun." Yeah. And the woman had a really good question. She said, "Well, President Bush, we didn't bring any bathing suits, so I don't think." He goes, No. Go up in the boathouse up there. I buy them from Walmart by the dozen. They're still in the plastic. Find your size. I'll be waiting for you down here." So they run up, and they put on their bathing suit. And during that time, he has his guys hook up a hot dog tube to the back of this boat. Now, a hot dog tube is not stable in a bathtub, much less the Atlantic Ocean. So they come running down in their bathing suits, and they were just so perky and cheerful people. And they get on the tube, and so Bush takes them out into the cove, just into the cove, not even out into the Atlantic where we were. And he just starts making a circle with a boat. And I know what he's doing because I do the same thing too. He's building the wake, building the wake, building the wake. Gets to about 2 feet, slams down the throttle, rips them across it. They are, boom, up in the air. They are like they are projectiles up in the air. And what goes up must come down. And there was no tube there when they came down, and they went under the water, and they came up. And even though it was August, it's Maine, you know, people, it's like 55 degrees, right? And I got to tell you, I've never heard a man scream that loudly in my life. And the hair was not perfect anymore, I can tell you that. And then Bush, for some reason, he might have had engine trouble. It took him a while to get back around to them. And they just slid them in like beached whales into the boat. You know, they're like this. And we're watching all of that, just watching all of that. And when it was done, Mrs. Bush looked at me. She said, "Do you feel any better?" I was like, yeah, you know, I feel bad, but I feel really good, too. So, yeah, I do. Now, I will tell a little story on myself. It was just so stupid, but we were staying in one of the little cottages there, and they had this phone system. It was like a hotel phone system. You could call separate rooms and separate buildings and all that. I had no idea any of this worked. And we were going to go up to the main house for dinner, and Michelle said, "You just call up, get the time, and is there a dress code? I don't want to show up in something we're not supposed to be in. I want us to, you know." I said, "Okay." So I went, and they had this whole directory of phone numbers and stuff. So the main house number was 11, right? So I'm like, okay, but do I have to dial 9 to get out? So I dialed 911. Swear to God. This is the first time I've admitted this in public, quite frankly. It's been 25 years. And I was like waiting. I expected somebody from the main house, and I was going to ask them. And it was like, "Kennebunkport Police Department." What? I was like, I just hung up. I didn't know what else to do. I just hung up. I was like, that didn't happen. Did it happen? And Michelle was like, "Hey, did you find out?" And I said, "Yeah, it's casual. Just casual." You know, the police showed up. I was like, "Wow, what happened? I wonder, you know, somebody called 911. I wonder who that was." Wasn't me. And then when we got back, we got a FedEx box from the Bushes, and in it was a letter from Mrs. Bush, and it said, "I checked with George, and he said these were not his." And inside the box was a pair of Tigger boxer shorts that my son had left under his bed up there. About this big. I'm glad that President Bush realized they were not his. So I'm really surprised we ever got invited back to anything after that. Now, I do a lot of research for my novels, and it's gotten easier over the years. And people now sort of call me up, you know, and say, "Hey, you know, we'd love to talk to you and come up and we'll answer questions and stuff." So I got a call from a major American intelligence agency one time, and they said, "We'd love for you to come up to Bethesda to our national world headquarters, and we'll give you a tour." I was like, "Okay, that sounds good." They sent a car. I went up there. Now, this is a place where you're given an RIF badge, radio frequency badge, and that's loaded with your security clearances. So when you go into any of these facilities, there's a transponder in every room, and the transponder reads your security clearances. If you're not cleared for a particular space, alarms go off, and all the computer screens go black automatically, so you can't see anything you're not supposed to see. It's kind of a cool thing. Problem was, I have no security clearances. So every room I went into, the alarms went off, and the computer screens went black. And people were jumping up, screaming at me, and I was like, "Hey, you invited me here, okay? So I don't know what to tell you." So they do a lot of interesting work. They keep the maritime shipping lanes safe for boat traffic. They are a big military support agency as well. For instance, let's say that a tank brigade in Afghanistan wants to know what's on the other side of a mountain. So they will dial this agency up, and they will tell them exactly what's on the other side of the mountain, and even provide firing coordinates for the tank so that no American soldier is put in harm's way, so they can dispose of the threat without any bad things happening to American soldiers. Or let's say a president is going to visit a city, and there's a motorcade route. This agency will be contacted by the Secret Service to 3D the motorcade route, and point out any possible sniper posts where a sniper could have a sight line on the president. And then they will post a Secret Service agent team at every one of those possible threat points, eliminating that threat. Pretty cool stuff. So I was there for like 4 hours, saw everything they did. And then I was escorted into this huge conference room, like 12 very serious-looking people with these huge briefing books in front of them, and the head honcho at the head of the table. And I still have no idea really why I'm there. And then the guy opens the discussion by saying, Mr. Baldacci, have you ever seen the movie Enemy of the State? I said, yeah, that was a cool movie with Gene Hackman and Will Smith. I said, that was a really cool movie. He goes, no, it wasn't. I looked around at all the people around the table, and they were all like, no, it wasn't. I was like, no, it was horrible, actually. I was thinking of something else. And I said, why was it horrible again? He said, because in that movie, the morons in Hollywood, they made the spy agency that did all the bad stuff, they said it was the NSA. Everyone with even a bit of intelligence knows that the NSA are the ears of American intelligence. We are the eyes of American intelligence. We were the evil agency in that movie. We got no credit for it whatsoever. I was like, okay, yeah, I could see why you'd be pissed about that. He said, so we want you to write about us in one of your novels. And he said, let me tell you, Mr. Baldacci, we can do evil like nobody else can. CIA, who cares, right? And we will help you write an exciting book with us at the centerpiece. And I said, okay. I said, and why do you want that? He said, well, it helps us with recruitment. I said, could you explain that to me a little further? He said, absolutely, because everybody knows who the CIA is. Everybody knows who NSA is. They're in movies and books and TV series, so people know them. They get the cream of the crop of the college graduates, and we don't because people don't know really who we are. So we want to get out into popular culture, films, television, and your books, and we think that will help us with recruitment. And so I wrote about them in the novel. I made them pretty evil. They were thrilled. You know, and then I changed my name and left the country. No, I didn't do that. But, so you never know when that stuff's going to happen. Again, I do a lot of research with my novels. The most important thing with research is, as a novelist, is to leave most of it out. You can't let your ego get in the way. You're not writing a textbook. And who here has read a flip book? Rhetorical question, you've all read flip books. A flip book is where a writer's done a lot of research. They don't want to leave any of it out. They don't want to take the time to intersperse it throughout, so they find a spot and they go, and they stick it there. So you're reading the story, enjoying it, and then you hit this stuff, and you're like, flip, 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 flip. Oh, God, okay, there's the story again. I never want to do that, so I try to intersperse it. So I leave most of it out. It could be a line of dialogue, it could be a few words, you know, a bit of exposition here or there. That's how I use my research. Research is important, but research can also get you into a lot of trouble. And my day of reckoning came one day when I was in Washington, D.C., sitting on an Amtrak train. I was sharing a table with two guys I didn't know. They were on the other side of me. They were businessmen, I assume. They had, you know, laptops and BlackBerries and cell phones and miniature satellite towers. These guys were like doing deals, and it was pretty cool. And I was on my phone, and I was heading to New York that day. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was a medical examiner in the Bronx Medical Examiner's Office. And she was a renowned authority on a field of forensic science that I needed to know more about in order to write a novel called Split Second, which was the first novel in the King and Maxwell series. And all I wanted to do on the phone call was set up a time to meet with her face-to-face. I like to do all of my research that way if I can. I don't like buffers in between. I don't like just Zooms. Body language can tell you a lot. How somebody says something can tell you a lot. When I was a lawyer, I did the same thing. I always wanted to talk to my witnesses face-to-face. Unfortunately, she told me that she was leaving to go out of the country, and she would be leaving to go to JFK before I even got to New York that day. She was on a special assignment, a criminal investigation overseas that we were conducting on behalf of a allied country. She was going to be gone for several weeks. No communication back stateside because of the sensitivity of the case she was involved in. So I could either ask her my questions now or wait until she got back. My writing schedule didn't allow for like nearly a month wait. So I said, look, I don't usually like to do it this way, but if this is the only slot we can do it, let's just do it. So here are my questions. And I said, okay, Doc, here's how I want to murder the guy. I know. So I went through my really elaborate poisoning technique that I'd given a lot of thought to, trust me. I said, the key thing is I need to make sure the police, when they investigate this, won't even know this person's been murdered. They don't know it's a homicide. She goes, David, if you do it the way you described to me, there's not a police investigation procedure that I know that would be able to uncover this as a homicide. I said, yes, but there's going to be a postmortem done by a pathologist. I need to make sure I can fool a pathologist. They won't know this person's been murdered. She said, David, trust me. I've often thought about murdering people. I get that, okay. Everybody has bad days. She said, if you do it exactly as you described to me, I don't know of any pathological procedure that would uncover this during the postmortem. So it's really the perfect crime. So I asked her a few more questions, and she answered them. And I said, Doc, I got to tell you, if I ever needed to kill anybody else, I'm calling you. So I hung up, and I was finished writing my notes. I look up. The guy over here had spilled his coffee from his neck to his crotch. He was like one enormous brown stain and not a happy man. The guy right across me, I will never forget what he looked like to my dying day. He didn't say a word. He's just looking at me and doing this. And over his shoulder, here come the Amtrak police. Swear to God, Amtrak has its own police department. And I didn't make it to New York that day. I was held as a person of interest by the Amtrak police, who apparently don't read a lot of books. Now, you know that I'm not making this up because you can go to your library and pick up a copy of Split Second, and in the acknowledgement section of Split Second, in the very back of the book is where I traditionally thank people who helped me with the book. The very last acknowledgement of Split Second reads something along these lines. To any and all passenger on the Amtrak Acela train who might have overheard me discussing poisoning techniques with an expert and were probably scared out of their wits at my seemingly diabolical intent, I apologize. Being of Italian-American heritage, I am very interested in my family history. My grandfather was born in a little village in Tuscany called Barga. It's a walled city like Lucca, just on a smaller platform. And his name was Amedeo Vittorio Giovanni Baldacci. He was about 6'4", Rudolph Valentino, sort of good looks. In fact, my dad was named Rudolph after Rudolph Valentino. I never knew my grandfather. He passed away long before I was born from an illness during the 1940s. And my dad always wanted to make it to Barga to see where his father was born and grew up. He never got there. The closest he got was Egypt when he was in the Navy during World War II. And I knew that my grandfather had immigrated through Ellis Island like millions of others. What people don't realize sometimes about Ellis Island and New York City in general, that for a lot of Italians and other Western Europeans, New York was too cold for them. So they would get on a train and they would get off at the first stop in the south, and that was Richmond, Virginia. There's a large Italian population in Richmond, Virginia, principally because Italians didn't want to be cold, you know? So they went south. He did that. He met my grandmother at a boarding house. They married. They had 8 kids. All 5 of their sons fought in World War II in various branches. They all came home alive, which was a miracle back then. So Amedeo Vittorio Giovanni Baldacci, he was an entrepreneur. He owned businesses in Richmond. He had a plane that flew over the city to give people aerial views of the city. He had a coal mine that produced, not coal, but water. That's bad. You don't want water in your coal mine. But he tried lots of different things. The thing was that nobody in Richmond could pronounce any of his names. You know, so everybody called Amedeo Vittorio Giovanni, they called him Mike. I don't know why, but they did. So the year my dad passed away, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go to Barga. I'm taking my family. I want to see this place, but I'm going to go for my dad. I'm going to channel my dad. I'm going to fulfill his dream, which we couldn't do while he was living for a variety of reasons. So we made the date to go over with some friends of ours who had kids our kids' age. And before we went, I got an email from the mayor of Barga. And he said, I read in a magazine you're spending your holiday in Italy. I would love for you to come to Barga, and I will show you where your grandfather grew up and tell you everything you need to know about him. And I was like, terrific, thank you. So we made a date. We flew over. We were staying at a villa a couple hours away. And the day came for us to go to Barga. We piled in a couple of cars. We started driving. And back then, there was no really satellites on smartphones. There weren't any really smartphones back then. So everybody had, your navigation system in the car. Everybody's heard of Hertz Never Lost, right, system? They have the same system in Italy, slightly different name. It's called Hertz Always Lost. I swear to God, I have driven in lots of countries overseas. I have never had a navigation system actually work. So about halfway to Barga, our navigation system went on and said, Arrivederci, and just died. So my poor wife is like pulling maps out of the glove box, not easy to read since they're all in Italian. And I'm getting frustrated because I was a trial lawyer, and the one thing that's beaten into your head is punctuality. You are never late, never late, never late to court. Judges do not like that. And we were already late for lunch. And finally, I just stopped at this crossroad. There were some buildings. It looked like there was something here. And I turned to my wife and I said, do you think this is it? Do you think we're here? And she looked out the window on the passenger side. She said, well, considering that there's a 14-foot tall poster of you on the wall over there, it's a pretty good bet we're in Barga. So then we noticed all the policemen directing traffic and just hordes of cars, and we were looking around, and I rolled down the window. I got the attention of one of the police officers. He came over, and my broken Italian and his broken English, and I said, can you tell me what's going on here? He goes, oh, it's David Baldacci Day in Barga. Park over there. So I slowly rolled the window up, and I kind of looked over at Michelle, and she was like giving me one of the, the wife death stares. We've all seen it, gentlemen. We all know what that looks like in life. And it was like, she looked at me, and she's like, David Baldacci Day, are you freaking kidding me? You said lunch. I said, honey, I don't know anything about liar. Okay, so we get out of the car, it's announced that we're there. Barga is a walled city, so the gates open, and out marches the mayor. He has the American and Italian flags draped over his torso. The American flag is flying over Barga for the first time since 1944 when the Americans liberated it. Behind the mayor is a marching band. I thought there was just college football games in America that had marching bands. I didn't know they had them over there. And then all these videographers and journalists, and behind them, everybody lives in Barga, right? So they're hugging and all this stuff and introducing, and off we went on this mind-blowing tour of Barga. We went to the Duomo, the government building. I saw where my grandfather was born. I did a book signing at one of the bookstores there, all my books in Italian. We went and had lunch. It was me, the mayor, our friends, 900 new friends. I do have to say the fried meatballs are the best thing I've ever had in my life. If you're there, please try them. And then we had gelato by the bucket, and we were doing all this other stuff, and time was going by. So we were like 5 hours, right? And we were staying at this villa, and it's a villa with views. How do you get a villa with views? You go up, right? So we had to drive up this mountain, the road's about this wide, no guardrails, 2,000-foot drop. I didn't want to drive that at night. And so Michelle said, go tell the mayor, fantastic, thanks so much, we're out of here. So I went over to the mayor, and I said, Mr. Mayor, what a treat, what a delight. Thank you so much. This has been like the most, and he was like, and now, Mr. Baldacci, it is time for you to give your grand speech in the center courtyard of the city. I was like, okay. So we go to the grand center courtyard of the city. It is beautiful. And the marching band plays one more song. The mayor stands up. They have a translator there to translate me because I don't really speak Italian well enough to give a speech that I had not prepared for anyway. And the mayor starts giving us presents. So the first is like a lifetime supply of locally pressed olive oil. Lovely gesture. Really weird to get back on a plane with that because it was far more than 4 ounces, I can tell you that. An oil painting by a local artist. A genealogical chart that's like this big of the Baldacci family they put together from the 11th century to my grandfather's generation, where I met people I didn't even know, my grandfather's siblings, they never came to the United States. That blew me away, it really did. And then a journal they took out of the town archives from my ancestor, Pietro Baldacci, who started writing in the journal in the 1640s. And because paper was so scarce back then, if you died and there was still paper, you just passed it down. And so the last journal entry in there is from the 1880s, all ancestors of mine. And then the mayor said, okay, the Baldacci Bambinos, my kids, come on up and get your swag, So the sea of people partied, and my daughter was about 14, 15 at the time, teenage daughter. She doesn't like attention. She doesn't like any of the focus to be on her. And so she's walking up past all these people. Her face is like bright red. She's hating life. She's not looking at the mayor. She's not looking at mom. She's looking at me. And she's giving me the teenage girl death stare that we've all, my blood pressure and just went up thinking about the death stare that I got from her. And the death stare very clearly said, you ruined my life. And I'm so going to get you back for it. Now, to complete the Mars-Venus story, my son, who was maybe 5 at the time, here's how he goes up to get his stuff. I'm wonderful. I know. Yes, thank you. So then it was time for my grand speech, and I got up and I said, even though it's August, it feels like Christmas. This outpouring of warmth, family, gifts, just good spirits, just like a magical time for me. And I couldn't really say more than that. I was really overwhelmed emotionally by all of it. And I was about to leave, and my friend who I traveled over there with, he said, you have to come and meet these gentlemen, these 4 gentlemen. So he took me over to this bench. 4 elderly men were sitting there with canes, soft felt caps, and each of them had a copy of one of my books in Italian. And they all stood up, and they took their caps off and sort of bowed in respect. I found out the youngest was 87, the oldest was 103. And I asked my friend, I'm like, this is wonderful, who are they? And he said, these are all Baldaccis. They came from different countries to meet you today. So, we did the Italian thing. We hugged, we cried, we looked around for more food. And years later, this travel guide called The Lonely Planet contacted me and said, hey, we're producing an anthology of travel stories by famous writers. Would you like to contribute a story? And I said, yeah, I have a story. I think I can contribute. So the one I wrote is what I just told you. It's called Coming Home. Because even though I'd never been to Barga before, in every visceral, significant, important element, it was like coming home to Barga that day. So, well, I'll finish with this story, and then we'll get all your books signed. I'm the world's fastest book signer. I don't know if you know that. The most books I've signed in the least amount of time. There's a warehouse outside of Chicago, 2.5 million square foot warehouse, and they provide all the books for Walmart and Target. So you can imagine a lot of books. And they have authors come up there for a week at a time and sign books every day for a week. And they wine and dine them, but it's a commitment. So they've been asking me for years, and I said, look, I have 4 hours. Let's see how many books I can sign in 4 hours. So I went up there, and they had people over here, slotting books through boxes, FedEx trucks. As soon as the FedEx truck was full, off it went. So I know the parameters of the page, so I don't have to look at the page. I just sign my name. I'm talking to people and telling stories and having a good time. So at the end of 4 hours, they had all the people in the warehouse who were like standing in front of me going, go, 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 go. So at the end of 4 hours, I had signed 4 pallets, which is 6,000 books in 4 hours. Yeah. And they have a ranking system there. And the guy who had held the record for like 20 years, I displaced, and his name was Jimmy Carter. So we will get your book signed tonight, never worry about that. So here's the last story. People ask, well, you're a famous writer, you must get recognized in public a lot. Almost never. It's like this anonymous celebrity, which I'm totally fine with. I would never want to be mobbed by people walking out. We're not athletes or musicians or stars. It's not that level of fame. But with that said, even when you're out in public and you're recognized, it's not the ego stroke you think it might otherwise be. I was at a restaurant with my wife. We were in a booth having a nice lunch. And you're sitting there eating, and I looked around the restaurant. I looked across the way, and all the way across the other side of the restaurant at a table, a man and a woman were there eating. And the woman was like laser locked on me, and it just freaked me out. And I looked away, and I thought, well, come on, you must have misinterpreted that. She's probably looking at something else. So I waited a couple of minutes, glanced over, laser lock. It was like I had a red sniper dot on my forehead. And I just stopped looking at that point. And I'm just eating my lunch. And a few minutes went by, and then I sensed someone standing next to the table. I thought it was our waitress. I looked up. It was the woman. So she pushes me over in the booth and sits down next to me. Okay. And she gives me this really coy look, and she says, you are who I think you are, aren't you? Any English teachers want to diagram that sentence? Because even though it's short, there is a lot going on that sucker. I have no idea who this woman is. I don't know if she's a psychopath. I don't know if she has weapons. So I said as calmly as I could, well, do you read a lot of fiction? And she said, oh, yes, I do. I said, well, then I probably am who you think I am. And then she just totally lost it. She goes, oh, my God, never in my whole life. that I think I have an opportunity to meet you. This is like the most magical moment of my entire existence. I can't process what's happening to me right now. And then she turns and screams, and like this banshee voice all the way across the room to the table, I guess, where her husband is eating. She was like, "I was right, Joe. It is John Grisham." I've known John a long time. We went to an event with him a few days ago in Washington, D.C. They are wonderful people. They are classy and as nice as you could possibly want. We've done a lot of events together, and he's just, I can't say enough about John. But I also have to say that at that moment in my life, I was not really feeling the love for John. I just wasn't. And my poor wife, to put it delicately, she blew iced tea out of her nose. And I go, sorry. So when my wife stopped laughing hysterically, she said to the woman, she goes, "That's the right genre, but the wrong author." And the woman looked mortified, and she said, "Oh my God." She goes, "Are you Baldacci?" I said, "Yeah, I am." Obviously terribly chagrined I was not Monsieur Grisham, she screamed all the way across the restaurant again to her husband, "You are right, Joe. It is the Italian." Now, I did an event, a Mark Twain fundraiser at Yale University about 10 or 11 years ago, and I invited two of my good friends to be on stage with me, Jodi Picoult and John Grisham. And the moderator before the event, I said, I don't care what questions you're going to ask, you have to ask this question. What's the strangest thing that's happened to you out in public? So Jodi answered it, John answered it, and then I told that story with John sitting right next to me. And I thought I was going to have to perform CPR on Grisham. The man had a good laugh. Now, with that said, this is a fundraiser for the Graves Public Library, right? Let me describe to you as succinctly as I can what I think libraries represent, at least to me, what they should represent to all of us. They are the soul of this nation, without a doubt. They are the soul of this nation. Why do I say that? Because on the shelves of the library stand the collective wisdom, intelligence, creativity, emotion, and soul of people all over the world. There's no other place where you can go and find that collection of just sheer brilliance and diversity. There's no other place you can go for that. So that's why it represents the soul of this nation, because that's who we are as a people. We welcome people from everywhere. We want to be inclusive. We want people to succeed here. We want them to be proud citizens of a great country. And I know, living in Washington, D.C., I'm very much involved in politics down there and the directions I see things going. I don't think we should live in a country where librarians are afraid they're going to go to jail for recommending a book or having a certain book on the shelf. That's not who we are. Now, my wife and I toured the library today, and it is, as I said before, it's a jewel. It's just a beautiful place. And when I walked through there and saw all the rooms that were so welcoming and inclusive and had so many different types of books that anybody really could find something that would inspire them, educate them, and make them feel good about themselves, that's a wonderful thing. So because this is a fundraiser, we want to do our part. So Michelle and I are going to be donating $25,000 to the Graves Public Library as part of this. Thank you very much.
I am kind of speechless right now. Mr. Baldacci will be here to sign books. So if you do want yours personalized, if you want to form a line right here, thank you all so much for coming tonight.